Welcome to the Freeborn Podcast. I'm Mike Jackson. Today I would like to discuss the Black Lives Matter movement. I have reached out to some people that are sympathetic or even part of that movement and would like to get them on the podcast to actually discuss this and get their perspective on these things. And I'm hoping that some or one of them will be willing to do so. But for now, I'd like to go through and point out a few things that I have learned or seen after a few weeks of research on what Black Lives Matters stands for as a group, or at least how it represents itself publicly is what it stands for. And I think that's the only fair way to judge them by. It's too broad and probably too disorganized to judge the movement based on how some of the individuals act or what they express to believe. But there are some sites where there is more of a consensus explanation as to what their goals are and what they wish to accomplish. And I think that we should start there by considering what those are. So one of those is a website that is called Campaign Zero, where they have a list of demands or a list of requests, however you want to put it. I'm not trying to disparage them, but they have a list of demands. I'm going to call them demands, things they want or things they feel are necessary in order to ensure that blacks in America are treated fairly and that their lives are taken seriously, which is, fine. Obviously, everybody wants, I say everybody, most Americans want everyone to be taken seriously and for everyone's life to matter, and that includes black people, white people, brown people, whatever kind of people we're calling them by colors, all people. So I'm going to go through the list of demands they have, and then we'll talk about some of these, but I'll go through them quickly at first. Number one is they want to end broken windows policing. Number two is they want community oversight. Number three, they want to limit the use of force by policemen. Number four, they want to independently investigate and prosecute police that misbehave. Number five, they want community representation. Number six, they want body cams. Number seven, they want increased training. Number eight, they want an end of for-profit policing. Number nine, they want demilitarization. And number 10, they want fair police union contracts. So those are the 10 demands that you'll find on the Campaign Zero website. You can go to that website and check them out, and they'll explain them further as to what they mean by these things. For instance, in broken windows policing that they want to put an end to was a philosophy that came about in the late 70s, early 80s, that small crimes tend to lead to big crimes. And that if you allow a society, or you allow a community, I should say, to engage in small crime unchecked, such as breaking the windows out of a abandoned building, that you're encouraging an air or an environment of criminality that will breed larger crime. At least that's how I understand the concept. And so from that, police departments and cities, especially large cities like New York, were especially bought into this and subscribed to this idea. Well, then they start really policing these small crimes. They stop just looking for the big criminals or the big catch, and they start cracking down on small things like graffiti and other things like that. And the idea isn't that they think graffiti is this horrible thing, but that when you walk into a community that has all the walls graffitied on, windows are broken out in businesses and things like that, well, it looks dilapidated. It looks unkept. It looks uncared for. It looks like there is no authority in the place. It looks like there's no police presence there. And so it seems to encourage more crime and larger crime, in that it then escalates and spirals out of control. Well, they want to end this type of policing. They want small things to just to let them go. They don't want to see people being locked up. They don't want to see people being arrested or fined or having interaction with the police, because that's always dangerous. Whenever you have an interaction with a police officer, well, there's always some danger involved. That's why he's wearing a gun, in order to create a sense of danger, and so that you will be careful in how you interact with him. So they want to put an end to these type of interactions, and they think they can end a lot of them just by stopping the idea of broken windows policing. I don't want to get into discussing whether or not that might or might not be true. I'll leave you to your resources. You can look it up and you can research it. There's been a tremendous amount of debate on this. This is actually a policing strategy that arose from people doing some real research and study into criminality and where crime is originating from and what might be the driving forces of it. And so this isn't just some crazy Wild West sheriff who had this harebrained notion that he's going to walk around and stop people from breaking windows. This was a very serious sociological idea put forward by some serious people. Now, whether that doesn't make them right, but that's what that was. The second thing we talked about is a community oversight, meaning they don't want internal affairs adjudicating when the police use force and whether or not they did it right or wrong. They don't want to go to internal affairs and go through the proper, or through the official channels, I should call it, where the police investigate themselves, is how it's being represented. So Black Lives Matters represent internal affairs as police investigating themselves, and they say it's no wonder that they're always cleared of any wrongdoing. Now, that's probably an overstatement. I don't think that police are always cleared of any wrongdoing. But anyways, that's what they want to put an end to the internal affairs department, and they want there to be a body that is external to the police departments, that is actually of the community, meaning that you get elected officials out of the community that compose the oversight committee for the police, and they have to answer to a civilian board of investigators. I'm not sure how exactly they plan on that working exactly or precisely. The community oversight like that would be hard pressed to have the training and resources to mount any real investigation. So it seems to me that this could very easily become some type of a kangaroo court where basically these people just decide on intuition who's guilty and who's not. Because a proper investigation into the use of force by a police officer, this is a very time-consuming, resource-intensive, and talent-intensive exercise. You can't just take somebody from the community and authorize them to investigate police misconduct. What experience do they have in investigating anything? This is so much like any other endeavor in life, where people think that because it seems easy when someone else does it, it must be easy to do. So I watch the NBA on television, and it seems like anybody could just jump up and dunk the ball. It seems like anybody could be a number one basketball player. Those of us sitting on the couch watching it, well, it's just because we don't want to. When in reality, not anyone can do these things. It takes a great deal of talent to be a painter or an athlete or an investigator. And just authorizing, empowering, a group of citizens to investigate the police, you're likely to get judge, jury, and execution, but not investigation. And the investigation is central to what is happening because these are very complex situations. When the police interact with suspects or citizens, those are complex interactions. And just because to the untrained eye it appears that someone's right and someone's wrong, that doesn't actually mean that's the case. And so I'm not sure exactly how this community oversight is actually going to work. I haven't found any detailed proposal on what such a community oversight would actually do other than simply condemn on intuition and prejudice, which, well, if that is what they want, then what they're proposing is that police be judged by lynch mobs, because that's what that is. Number 3 is they want to limit the use of force. That's a lot of these. I think they have some good points, and they're highlighting some serious problems that many people have had with the police for a very long time. I've been reading columnists, conservative columnists, who have complained and have written public columns and public papers against the escalating use of force that we find in the police department. Not just on this number 3, this third demand they have, but on the 9th demand, which is to demilitarize the police. And I can see the point they're making, that we have police that look like stormtroopers and are driving around in military-grade vehicles sometimes, carrying military-grade weapons. And it doesn't seem like a civilian police force that is there to protect and to serve, especially when they come up to doors and they're busting the door down with explosives or with huge battering rams, with military-grade equipment. They're doing these things. And so, yes, I can understand that when you look at that, when I look at that, I think, I don't really like living in a militarized society. I used to live in one. So in Mexico, the police are extraordinarily corrupt, extremely corrupt. And so the government, the federal government, relies heavily on the use of the military, on the use of the Mexican army to police the country, which is illegal in America. In the United States, the army is not allowed to police the country. That's against the law. But in Mexico, it's not, and they use the army predominantly to police the country. And I don't like living in that place. I don't like being stopped on the side of the road for a routine traffic stop by people walking around with fully automatic weapons, and there being a huge gunner up on a tank next to the road. Now, their argument is that they're combating the cartels and the drug lords, and those people are heavily armed, and so they're having to respond in kind. And that may be, I don't know, but I just know as a citizen, I was always at ill ease to be living in a militarized country, and the police seem to be increasingly moving in that direction. I think we need to go back more in the direction of a less militarized police. But there is an opposing argument to be made to that as well. And that is, the criminals in America are increasingly better armed. All we have to do is look at the rioters and what weapons many of them are carrying around, whether they be makeshift weapons like Molotov cocktails, or whether they be, more commercial weapons or purchased weapons like AR-15s being passed out of the back of trunks of cars. Well, the police can't have a Barney Fife pistol with a 1 bullet in their pocket, given those situations. You can go back and look at the North Hollywood bank heist that happened in the 80s, where the suspects came out of the bank wearing full body armor, carrying automatic weapons and had the police completely outgunned. The police had to go to a nearby sporting goods store and borrow heavier weapons in order to try to combat these people. So we don't want the police put in that predicament. And just because we demilitarize the police does not mean we're going to demilitarize the public, or the criminals, I should say, who are carrying many times high-powered weapons, and the police simply cannot combat that with a 5-shot 38 pistol. That just they're going to have to carry more powerful weapons. And so there's the two sides of this argument, and they've tried to balance that, I think, in many departments by having a specific unit, like a SWAT unit, who's in charge of carrying those weapons and responding to those type of things. The problem is that, like in the case with that North Hollywood bank heist, it was quite a while before SWAT showed up. The police had already gone to that sporting goods store and borrowed weapons by the time the SWAT showed up on the scene with the weapons that were needed to take those people down. And so that's something that has to be considered. But just blanket saying we are going to limit the use of force, how are we doing that exactly? Does Black Lives Matter think that police are authorized to shoot people too easily? I'm not sure that the data bear up to that type of concept or that type of viewpoint. So I'm not sure exactly what the proposal is on how force is going to be limited. One of the things that they tend to do is say that police shot unarmed men, but the problem I have with this Campaign Zero website and what I've heard from the Black Lives Matters activists is the way they are very selectively redefining what it means to be unarmed. What they mean by that is that the suspect did not have a gun, but that is not the same as being unarmed. According to them, if the police shoot somebody who is trying to lob a Molotov cocktail onto them and burn them alive, and the police shoot them, they are shooting an unarmed man. If the police shoot somebody who lunges at them with a knife, they believe that an unarmed man is being shot. That's not unarmed. And so their numbers that they have on this website are heavily skewed with a very selective definition on what it means to be unarmed. I understand that the police probably have a skewed number as well. So the reality is that there's probably more than the police admit to, but far fewer than Black Lives Matters advertises of people who are truly unarmed, who are not dangerous. I have a difficult time thinking of a large male with no weapon as being technically, or being, I should say practically, unarmed. He may technically be unarmed, but if you have a man who's, let's say, 6'4" and he weighs 300 pounds and he's young and strong and he is hitting the cops, pounding them with his hands, I'm not sure how unarmed that person can be called. I realize that technically speaking, he doesn't have a weapon on him, but the reason why this is the problem I have with this. This comes from the idea that the police should behave the way they do in the movies. So if the suspect throws his gun down and offers the police to fight with a knife, well, in the movies, the hero cop tosses his weapon in the gutter and pulls out his knife. That doesn't happen in real life. I don't know if the BLM understand that that's not a real life scenario. The police do not attempt to be equally armed with the suspects or with the people they're interacting with. The police are looking to have to be better armed than the criminal element in society. They want to be better armed than anybody they are interacting with. This is one reason why our country outlawed fully automatic weapons in the hands of citizens. Because we wanted the forces, the peacekeeping forces of our country, both the military and the police forces and the law enforcement officials, to be better armed than criminals, better armed than suspects, better armed than anybody they might walk into their house to see. Every country in the world wants this, wants them to be better armed. So when we say we're going to limit the use of force and we're going to demilitarize the police, I understand what they're saying and I sympathize with it to a certain degree. At the same time, having lived in a militarized, I sympathize because I've lived in a militarized area, but having seen both sides of this, the idea that the police are going to match gun for gun, knife for knife, fist for fist, and they're going to have a fair fight with every suspect. We don't want the police to have fair fights. This isn't about the police trying to prove they're the baddest guys on the block. They are trying to disarm, they are trying to subdue suspects as quickly as possible, not as fairly as possible. And what it seems to me is that Black Lives Matter has this idea that the police need to give every criminal a fighting chance. I realize it may seem like the use of force, by limiting it, we're going to have less deaths. But one of the few things that I think actually keep criminals from pushing the issue to the point where it is inevitable that they die or somebody dies in the interaction is when there is a real concern or a real fear that the police are authorized to use force. And as soon as we tell everyone the police are no longer authorized to use any force, what do you think these neighborhoods that are already inundated in crime are going to look like when they all know that that gun that the police carry is the Barney Fife gun and it doesn't have any bullets in it? So yeah, it's I understand it's a tough deal and that a tough thing to discuss or to understand because I can see both sides of this. Now that's for you to figure out, I guess. However, when we're talking about the limiting the use of force by the police, this leads me to what I think is to be the biggest problem with the Black Lives Matters movement and this list of demands. None of these demands, and nobody I've heard myself, and if they're out there, you point them out to me, but nobody I have heard from that movement or is sympathetic with that movement is talking about the other side of that coin. So we can talk all day about the police abusing their authority, the police using excessive force, having a power trip, a God complex, or whatever. And there is certainly much to be said about that that's legitimate. But there's also the other side of the issue, and that is that these communities, particularly the African American communities, are chock full of crime. I realize that a lot of African Americans, a lot of blacks, are killed every year by the police. I understand that that happens. I don't think it is nearly as many as the Black Lives Matters movement claims it is. They say it's over 1,000 people a year who die by the hands of the police, but all the objective or fair all the objective studies I've seen put the number more in the realm or the range of 300 to 400 people a year, which is considerably fewer than 1,000 like the Black Lives Matters movement claims. But let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. And let's say that it is actually 1,000 people a year who are killed by the police in America. It's 17,000 a year who are killed every year from crime. So even though it's not to say that we don't have an issue with policing that needs to be addressed in America. It is 17 times less, even given them the largest number they want to claim. It's still 17 times less of a problem than the problem we have in the inner cities, particularly, or especially, of these young men, and it's predominantly young men, killing each other. Now, why aren't they addressing that? So you want the police to limit their use of force. Okay, fine. So we can talk about proposals on how that should be and what kind of warning should be given and how much time should be allotted and how people should be negotiated with or talked down, or shouldn't just run into the Walmart and shoot a guy who's holding a BB gun. I get that. I understand. Okay, fine. Let's have that discussion. Let's talk about that. But we can't talk about that if the same people are also not saying, and we acknowledge that our community has a major problem with violence to the degree that a policeman doesn't know in any community who might or might not shoot them. So this is the overall problem with the Black Lives Matter movement. They take no responsibility for any of these things. It's all about the police. The police use excessive force. The police are militarized. The police don't have any community oversight. The police need to be independently investigated and prosecuted. The police need community representation. The police need body cams. The police need more training. Why don't the blacks and the black community need these things? Is there not a problem there? Are we going to pretend that the police are storming into peaceful neighborhoods, harassing people as they sit on their porches and pray? That's not what's happening. All you have to do is look at the actual data. The police are not just killing black people in their neighborhoods. I know that's how it's presented, but that isn't what is actually happening. If that were the case, why are black females many times less likely to die at the hands of the police than black males? If it's just about the police are tyrants and abusive, and they want to shoot black people, then why are they discriminating which black people they're killing? Why is it that you say, well, it's men? Okay, black men. They have a problem with black men, but not with black women. Well, then why aren't they killing black men over the age of 40? Almost everyone killed by the police, almost all the black men killed by the police, not everybody. The police actually kill more white people than black people in by volume. But almost all the black people killed by the police are young men between the ages of 18 and 35. Almost all of them. So are the police discriminating? They don't have a problem with black people once they reach the age of 35, and then they no longer just walk in and shoot innocent black people over the age of 35? Is that what's happening here? Well, obviously that just makes no sense. The real issue is that there is a huge problem in the black communities. An enormous problem. If you are a young black man, the most likely method by which you are going to die is to be killed by another young black man. It's the number one cause of death of the black community. This is a serious problem. And this isn't a modern problem. So you might think that somehow this was caused by the police. But that isn't the case. I've read the crime statistics of the United States going all the way back to 1900. And going all the way back to 1900, black males are 3 to 10 times more likely every year to commit murder. And they are just as more likely to be murdered. This is a problem in the black community that goes back as far as I can find crime statistics for. Now, this is something we need to be discussing. This is something we need to be thinking about. I know that conservatives like to say that the reason for all this crime in the black community and the reason for the homicide rates, the murder rates, is because of the welfare state, and that the welfare state has essentially married the black woman and have penalized being married, and so we don't have fathers in the homes, and then we say, well, that's what has caused this rise in black crime rate. And it sounds good, I guess. I mean, so it sounds terrible, obviously, but it sounds like a plausible explanation is what I mean. And there is some truth to that. There is some things that actually does explain. However, it's not entirely accurate. Because the murder rate, which is the reason why the murder rate is so important to look at, and when we're talking about crime, we almost always point to the murder rate. And it's not because we're saying other crimes don't matter, but it's because the murder rate generally always gets reported. Rape, theft, burglary, the fraud, arson, these things don't always get reported. Rape seldomly gets reported, is the claim, and it's probably true. So it's hard to talk about crime very accurately when we're talking about things that are unreported many times. But murder almost always gets reported, and it gets solved more often than any other crime because it's such a more serious crime. And so that's why we look at the murder rate. And when we look at the murder rate, we find that the murder rate in America, going back almost 200 years, or I'm sorry, 120 years, forgive me, going back 120 years, the murder rate amongst the black community has always been many times more than the rest of the country. So this is a very long-standing problem. And we cannot lecture or condemn the police for use of force when they are trying to keep the peace in a community that has historically been racked with violence. We have to discuss both sides of this issue. And this is what this movement is not doing. They are not discussing their part in the problem. When you have a community that hates the police, that call them when they are in fear and yet turn on them when they start to arrest their own family member, we can't have that just simply, there is not going to be any solution to these problems like this. Black Lives Matters, if they want any credibility whatsoever in presenting these requests or these demands to the police, they are going to need to match every point with the introspective point, admitting where they themselves also have a problem and what they demand of their community to fix that. So you want less use of force. Then Black Lives Matter should have a companion guide, a companion point to that demand, and demand that the black community comply with police officers when they give them commands or instructions. Comply. So when the police pull you over and tell you to put your hands on the steering wheel, comply. Now, if you feel you're being targeted, that you are being discriminated against, that you are being treated unfairly, then Black Lives Matter needs to educate. This is where the training point would come in for their community, educate and train their citizens that the proper course of action is not to resist the police. The proper course of action is to get name and badge number and pursue that through the court system. So training for the police, I agree. We need more training. That's why these defund the police movements are so ridiculous. You can't demand training and then also demand defunding, because training costs money, a lot of money. But we also need to train the communities how to interact with the police, how to interact with authorities. One of the things that Black Lives Matters needs to take responsibility for is the negative view of cops that blacks have. I know that there are many black citizens in this country who have been harassed. They feel it's because of racism. I think that in almost all cases that's not true. I do not think that the vast majority, I don't think that 99% or even higher of policemen are harassing black men, young men, because they're black. One reason is because they're not harassing all other black people. They're only harassing young black men. So the idea that this is a black thing, a racial thing, it just doesn't bear up to this data. Now, I think that there are many cops who do harass black young men. But why are they doing that? Now, this isn't to excuse them or to make or to apologize for them or make an argument for them, I should say. Defend them. But rather to understand why this might be happening. So, if you knew that a young black male is 5 times more likely to shoot you than a young white male, you are probably going to look at that person differently than if he was white. And it's really not about the skin color. That's just one of the identifying markers of people who comprise a large portion of the criminal element. Now, let me be clear on this. Not all young black men are criminals. In fact, the majority of them are not. But the majority of criminals, over 50%, are young black men. Now, statistically speaking, if you're sophisticated in your statistical analysis of things, then you'll realize that the majority of these young black men are not criminals, and therefore it's unwarranted to assume that any young black man is dangerous, because the majority of them are not dangerous. But that's not how human beings typically evaluate the world around them. We evaluate the world around us in a very survivalistic point of view or mentality. It's like if you go to Taco Bell and you get sick afterwards. Now, you're likely to want to go to any Taco Bell ever again. And you'll say, I haven't been sick in years. And I went to Taco Bell and I got sick. See, that's the same bias that we're talking about, the unsophisticated statistical analysis of the cause and effect thing. Not all Taco Bells made you sick, but everything that made you sick in the last 5 years was a Taco Bell. And so therefore, you are uninclined to patronize Taco Bells anymore at all. Not just the one where you got sick, any Taco Bell. Now, that's not fair. That's discrimination. And that's exactly what it is. And discrimination is a survival technique. Now, I'm not trying to make a case for it and say that it's good or that we shouldn't think our way through it and think our way into a more enlightened position. Of course we should. Not just about Taco Bell. So it's true that an overwhelming majority of criminals are black young men, but not an overwhelming majority of black young men are criminals. And that's part of the training that police need to be given. But the black community needs to look at this and say, there is a legitimate reason why the survival instincts of the police kick in when they see members of our community. And we need to rectify that situation. This is one reason why, if you're brought up in a two-parent home especially, but at least by a strong mother, this is drilled into you. This understanding, this intuition is built into your raising. I was raised this way. I know many people, both white and black, who also received this age-old wisdom. And that is that you not only represent yourself, but you represent your community. You represent your family. You represent your neighborhood. You represent your heritage. You represent your grandchildren, your great-great-grandchildren. What you do reflects on everyone else. I'll give you an example of this. When a young black man takes his car to the mechanic because he has a noise in the front wheel, and the mechanic tells him it's going to cost him $1,500 to fix it. And he comes to, and he finds out later on that mechanic was ripping him off, and that it really would have only cost $50 or $60 if he had taken it to a different mechanic to get that fixed. He now is suspect of all mechanics. He discriminates against all mechanics. Whenever he takes his car to any mechanic, he is wary. He is concerned that mechanic wants to rip him off. Because even though he might know in his head that not all mechanics are thieves, but every rip-off artist he's dealt with has been a mechanic. Well, the police have this same survival instinct. And that has to be trained out of us. And it's very important that it is. It really is important to not think that way. Because then we end up treating people who are good people, innocent people, we treat them as if they were criminals. And that is very dangerous to do when you have a gun in your hand. And so the police must be trained away from this. But the black community has to be trained out of this also. Black Lives Matters speak as if all policemen killed people. Do you realize that it is a tiny fraction of the police in America who have ever killed anybody? Only 25% of policemen ever fire their weapon in the line of duty in their entire life. 25%. Let's just assume that every one of them actually killed a young black man. Let's just assume that. That means that you are saying that 75% of police are bad because 25% of them have done. When in fact, even the statistics are even worse than that. It's only like 2 or 3% of police who have ever killed anybody in the line of duty. So you're saying that 97% of police are evil because of the actions of 3%. And of those 3%, only a tiny fraction of them actually were not justified killings. Are you really blaming the police for shooting somebody who is shooting at them? For shooting somebody who is choking their partner and won't let go? Are you really blaming the police for that? Of course not. And so what you're saying is, or what the Black Lives Matters movement is saying, I keep saying you're saying this, I don't know who you are, forgive me. But what the Black Lives Matters movement is implying is that 97% of the police are evil because of what 3% or fewer do or have done. How is that any different than the police thinking that 97% of young black men are dangerous because 3% of them are? And just to put in perspective the number of people who are killed by the police every year, I know you look at that number and you say 1,000 people. Let's just go with this high inflated number that Black Lives Matters gives. You look at that and you say 1,000 people killed by police. That's just horrible. Well, it is tragic. But if you put that in the context of how many interactions the police have with citizens every year, it comes out to like 1 in a million. So 1 out of every million times the police interact with the community, 1 of them die. When you go to the dentist, do you realize that out of 1 million interactions with a dentist, 3 of them result in death? That means that the dentist is 3 times more likely to kill you than a policeman. Where's the list of demands against the dentist? Doctors are even more lethal. So these are things that must be considered. Black Lives Matters, if they want to be taken seriously, at least in my opinion, and I want very much to take them seriously. I am not trying to dismiss them out of hand. I'm not trying to hand wave them away. That's why I would like for one of them to come on the podcast and convince me of what they're saying. I hate racism as well. I don't particularly like policemen. I especially don't like what policing has become recently in today's age. So I would very much like to be on board with them. But I have a problem when any group with grievances such as this, whether it be Black Lives Matters or Antifa or conservatives or anyone else, come out with some list of demands that does not address the fundamental problems in their own community as well, that don't take responsibility for any part of the problem. I read through their website and I don't find a single instance where they say the police are bad because of this, but we contribute to the problem because of this. Another problem with the Black Lives Matters issue or movement is that I don't like when these type of terms like that one, Black Lives Matters, BLM, are weaponized. Black Lives Matters should be denouncing this. It is diluting their credibility. So just recently, after the whole issue with George Floyd, a NBA basketball star by the name of Demarcus Cousins, many of you probably know him, he tweeted one of the Sacramento Kings broadcasters, a white man, and baited him to offer a public opinion on Black Lives Matters. He tweeted to him and asked him, "Hey, long time no see, what's your take on Black Lives Matters?" To which the white man broadcaster responded and said, "Great to hear from you. I didn't think you'd ever return my call," or something to that effect. And he said, "I think all lives matter, every single one of them." That man was fired from both of his jobs for racism. Now here's the backstory to this. Well, first, what he answered is by no means racist. That's silliness. He not only said all lives matter, including black lives, But he said every single one of them. So that's a problem. But when you know the backstory to what's happening, you realize that these two men had a beef. The broadcaster had been very harsh in his criticism of Cousins when he played on that NBA team. And so they had a beef with each other, or Cousins had a beef with the broadcaster. I'm not completely sure that the broadcaster took it personally, but it appears that Demarcus Cousins took that criticism of his play and his teamwork very, very personally. They had been set up to have a on-air debate or discussion about their disagreement, and Demarcus Cousins backed out of it. So when this comes up, he tweets him this and basically baits him, knowing that he is likely, as a white person, to not completely want to sign on with this propaganda statement, which he didn't. And he got him fired. So when something that is supposed to be for good is being weaponized and being used to tear down people that don't share the zealousness of the opinion. It isn't even that he disagreed with the movement. He just didn't espouse it as strongly, as vociferously. This is because this term has turned into a purity test, an orthodoxy test. This is like when the Inquisition killed people if they didn't swear the right allegiance to the right religion. So this is another problem that needs to be addressed if they want to be taken seriously. But we also need to discuss why it is the police are acting the way they are today. Now, the BLM narrative is, Black Lives Matter narrative is, that cops have a racist problem. And there's no doubt that there are cops who are racist, because in every society, every single one, in every group of people, there are those who have that. And it would be silly to think that no policeman is a racist. Of course there are. But this isn't systemic. The system isn't tilted against blacks. That's just pure silliness. All you have to do is read the laws on the books. There are no laws on the books that give cover to this. So it's not a racist, but there is a problem in the police department. In my opinion, there is a serious problem in the police department that the police and that law and that law-loving citizens or law and order citizens need to address. One is that the police have been weaponized against the citizenry, in my opinion. They have been turned into revenue collectors for the state. And this has been very detrimental for their overall image. When the police are patrolling ridiculously low speed limits and obvious speed traps in order to increase the revenue for their little small town, they are not only damaging the image of small town cops who have a terrible image, but they're wearing the same color blue as every other policeman. States, and it has to come from a state level, but these large cities that are battling a bad image of policemen and people's negative response towards policemen, they need to demand of the state to fix this problem. The police cannot be revenue collectors for the state. If you want to understand, if you're not following me exactly on this, and you want to understand the perspective or the view that many people have of the police, they see them as IRS agents. Nobody likes them. And most policemen are not party to this. I have a number of policemen that are friends of mine and family members of mine. And all the ones I know hardly ever write tickets, even when they're pressured to do so, because they don't want to give people tickets. They only do it when they think it's truly egregious the infraction that has been committed. So if they're speeding in a school zone, that's a big one for many cops. Driving under the influence. And even then, I had a man that worked for me who was let off multiple times for driving without a license because he had it suspended for DUI. And I knew, and he was allowed to drive away, even though legally they were supposed to imprison him and impound his car, but the police let him go because they understood that he was just trying to provide for his family. And he had made a mistake, and he was trying to go to work, and he was trying to make sure that his family could feed themselves, and the police were very sympathetic to that. Many police are like that, and they are attempting to police the community. But the cities, particularly these small towns, but increasingly even the large cities, want to turn them into revenue generators. This is a serious problem and it needs to be corrected. Speed limits need to be raised to be more reasonable. 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in neighborhoods is ridiculous, especially when it's a street that you actually have to go through to get out of that neighborhood into somewhere else. One proposal I offer up is that the state needs to pass a law that says that the bulk, or 80% of all money, or everything except for a small nominal fee of all money generated from tickets on state roads, go to the state treasury. You'll find that there's a lot less small-town cops patrolling the highway going through their town if they don't get to keep the fine money that comes from it. But something has to be done, because this is a huge black eye to the police department. Along with that is the tic-tac laws that are passed that police then are required to uphold and to police, like selling loose cigarettes. Or pretty much anything. I don't know if you realize, but if you went and bought a big pack of gum and you sold them individually, that would be illegal. And technically, the police should tell you to stop and arrest you if you don't. These are not things that the police should be doing. The more we criminalize human interaction, the more the police are going to be hated. We need the police to focus on real crimes that are causing harm to other people. Nobody is being harmed by someone selling loosies, single cigarettes. I used to live in Mexico. In Mexico, you can go to any store in the country, well, any little mom and pop store, which are like on every street corner, there's a store, and you can buy one of anything you want. You can buy one stick of gum. You can buy one donut. They'll open up the package and sell you one donut. You can buy one cigarette. You can buy one square of toilet paper if that's what you want. I mean, when you're desperate, you're desperate. Nobody is hurt by these things. Not even the companies that sell the stuff. The only ones that are hurt is the state that is not getting their cut on taxes. And so they are using the police to collect their revenue. And the police are duty-bound to enforce that law. Well, that's just going to result in people hating the police. We have to get rid of that. We have to roll back all of this excessive criminalization. There was a book written a while back. I think it was called 3 Felonies a Day, something like that. At least that was the idea of the book anyways. And the idea is that the average American commits 3 felonies a day without knowing it, because there's so many laws on the books. There's so many laws that everything is criminalized, and you don't even realize all the laws you're breaking every day. And that if the police want a reason to detain you, want a reason to arrest you, they can find one. That's why people are apprehensive of the police. Well, we need to put an end to that. We are not going to have police being respected as long as our politicians are cravenly utilizing them as revenue collectors. If you want to get an idea of what people's view is, many people's view is of the cops, then read what the Israelites, the Jews' view was in the Bible about publicans, who were the authorized revenue collectors of the Roman Empire. They were hated. So we have to decriminalize humanity, decriminalize human interaction. I think we need to decriminalize seatbelts, drugs, eating on trains and on train platforms. There was a young man who was detained and threatened to be arrested and fined for eating a McMuffin on the platform of a train station waiting for the train. Not a small one, not like a little Via bus, not like a little city bus platform, like a huge platform that would hold like 500 people. There was like 5 or 6 people on it at the time, and he's eating a McMuffin out of his hand. He didn't litter. He didn't throw anything on the floor. There's nobody around him. And the police come up and detain him and escalate the situation to where he almost got arrested because he's eating a McMuffin. Is this really what we want our police doing? Is this the type of interactions we want them having? But they're duty bound to enforce whatever law legislators make. This isn't a problem in the police. And this is another problem with this set of demands that Black Lives Matters put out. The problem in their community is not the police. Not the main problem. The main problem in their community are their politicians who are criminalizing every form of their behavior. And then the police have a sworn duty to uphold all of these tic-tac laws. One other thing is, we have to understand that many of the police are acting the way they are, not because of racism, not because of God complex or ego trips, but because they have what I would call a form of PTSD. They are dealing with the worst element of our society on a continual basis. They're not being invited to birthday parties and anniversaries and block parties to have a good time. Nobody calls 911 because they have too many donuts and they need the cops to show up and help them eat them. People always call them to come and deal with the worst elements of society. Now, that's what they signed up for, so this isn't, like a cry fest for them. They get paid for that, and most of them get paid pretty well. But we have to understand that that will have a toll on anybody of sound mind. If they're not psychopaths, then that is going to have a very serious toll on their mental state. And so I think that the police departments and the cities and communities need to push for some type of way of addressing this mental anguish that I have no doubt many policemen are in. Now, some handle it better than others. I have a very good friend who is a cop for 25 years, and he handled all of that extraordinarily well. I've known others not so well. And that's just, each person is individual, different, and so you don't know how someone's going to handle it, and you don't know what might take them from being fine to all of a sudden falling apart. And out of a sense of duty, they don't crack on the outside, but they're broken up on the inside. And then you get these police who are completely apathetic to what they're doing. They're going through the motions. They're angry. They're disgusted. And that's because they're dealing with the dredges of humanity. Black, white, brown, of all colors. But they're dealing with the very worst element of every community. That's who they deal with every day. So that needs to be taken into account. Something needs to be done. Try to mitigate that. And acknowledge that often when police misbehave, it isn't because they're discriminating against someone because they're poor or because they're black or because they're driving a broken down car. But because they're overwhelmed and they're suffering from mental anguish. And that isn't to say that it's excusable. It's to say that we need to deal with these problems at their source and not at their effects. All right. Well, I would very much like to have a discussion with anybody who sides with Black Lives Matters, who is a part of them or sympathizes with them. And I would like to hear what they have to say about this. So if you're one of those people, send me an email at podcast@freebornchurch.com. And if you're willing to have a thoughtful, pleasant conversation, then I would very much like to get you on my podcast. Most of the people that listen to me, there's not very many, but most of them that do, would probably share more my opinion than yours. So that's a great opportunity for you to convince people who don't agree with you, which is what we all should be trying to do. One of the problems I find in both sides of this argument is that they only want to talk to the people they agree with. That isn't helpful to anybody. The only way you, if you're Black Lives Matters or you sympathize with them, are going to affect any change is by convincing people like me that you're right, or at least that some of what you say is right. And the only chance I have of affecting any change is by convincing you. So we should be actively looking to speak to each other, not to our clones and to our fan base. That's not helpful. All right. Well, this is the Freeborn Podcast. You can contact us at podcast@freebornchurch.com. We'd love to hear from you. And I guess that's it.